From the Warhammer Imperium magazine, collected short stories narrated by J.H. Miniatures. At the request of Inquisitor Draxos, into the swarm. Thought of the day. For every battle honour, 1,000 heroes die alone, unsung and unremembered. To attempt understanding is folly when dealing with aliens. The Tyranid is an implacable foe, for it is not driven by a desire for power or for conquest, but by an unquenchable urge to devour. We Blood Angels have learned this to our cost. Only through the sacrifice of thousands of Sanguinius's brave sons does Baal still stand. Now is the time for vengeance, however. Wherever the Tyranid treads, we shall be waiting. And we shall not rest until every last one of those fell creatures has been exterminated. Brother Lyson, Blood Angels' Second Company. On a world besieged by terrifying Tyranid bioforms, a Blood Angel strike force engages in a brutal, bloody battle to turn back the swarming tides of ravenous Xenos invaders. Brother Lyson's razor-edged combat blade pierced the chitinous body of a scuttling, clawing Tyranid creature, sending a spray of foul-smelling ichor through the air. The foul fluid splattered across his power armour, staining its crimson plate. Stamping on the dead Tyranid's armoured carapace, he hefted his weapon once more and glanced around at the ongoing battle. As far as the eye could see, crimson-armoured Blood Angels were engaged in brutal hand-to-claw combat with the ravening Xenos creatures. The air was thick with the screeching cries of the Tyranids and the roar of bolt weapons. The skies above were filled with scores of winged Tyranid bioforms, spitting death down upon the Space Marines from above. Above the seething flocks of Xenos monstrosities, something colossal blotted out the sun, its vast wings beating as it descended from the heavens. The roar of thruster engines accompanied its arrival, a wing of storm-raving gunships bursting through the Tyranid swarm in the vast creature's wake, their guns firing into the flocks of flying Xenos creatures, assault cannons ripping through the Tyranid bodies and releasing clouds of gore that rained down on the battlefield. The monstrous bioform landed before Lyson and his squad mates, wings beating to soften its landing, and let out a terrifying, ear-piercing shriek. A winged hive tyrant, a lethal Tyranid creature, and a leader amongst its kind. The hive tyrant's screams seemed to stir the swarm to action. Termagants and Tyranid warriors thundered across the icy ground, driving towards the Blood Angels' positions in their hundreds. Lyson turned to face the horde. He levelled his bolt pistol and fired a hail of bolts into the seething tide of aliens. More of the Tyranid's acrid, foul-smelling ichor flew as explosive bolts punctured his target's armoured forms and detonated within their bodies as the wave of Xenos creatures washed over him. He brought his combat blade to hand once more, piercing Xenos foes with each cut, thrust and swing of the lethal weapon. The voice of his captain and commander, Arenos Carlane, crackled and hissed above the din of battle. "All squads! The hive mind will weaken if we destroy the synapse creatures. Target the largest Tyranids, bring them down, and the impetus of the assault will be broken," the captain bellowed. On Lyson's left flank he caught sight of Captain Carlane, clad in a suit of power armour, adorned with gold, Stormbolter spitting death into the Xenos ranks. In his right hand he held a thunderhammer, which he swung in wide, arcing blows. Each time the weapon struck the chitinous shell of a Tyranid victim, it released a blast of energy that shattered its victim's body. At Carlane's side, veterans of the First Company, all bearing the same Terminator power armour as their commander, advanced relentlessly through the surging aliens. Reserved for First Company veterans alone, Terminator power armour reduced the speed of those who wore it, but turned them into walking fortresses, impervious to all but the most lethal blows. The Tyranid hive mind had noticed the threat. The winged Tyranid monstrosity shifted its gaze towards the captain and his brothers, letting out an unholy screech and beating its wings furiously. The captain and his retinue had clearly drawn the Tyranid's attention. From the teeming Xenos ranks, a series of larger Xenos bioforms began to move forwards, closing in on the Terminators. Lyson pressed forwards, combat blade slashing and stabbing, bolt pistol roaring. the rest of his squad following in his wake, their auto-bolt rifles opening a channel through the Tyranid swarm and towards the screeching winged monstrosity at its heart. Ahead, the Terminators were now surrounded by a wall of Tyranids, who rained blows down upon their victims. One of the hulking Space Marines fell, knocked from his feet by the charge of a howling blade-limbed foe. The Tyranid's long purple tongue protruded from its fanged maw as it rained blows down on the fallen Space Marine, chipping its way through his reinforced ceramite armour. Lyson and his brothers could do little to help their fellow Blood Angels. Instead, they cut a path through the distracted Tyranids until they stood in the shadow of the monstrous, winged Hive Tyrant. The beast had yet to notice the Space Marine's advance. Lyson's squad unloaded a salvo of bolter shots into its exposed flank. Explosive rounds impacted against its thick, armoured form, blasting away chunks of chitinous armour and membranous wing. The beast screeched once more, louder this time, and shuffled round to face the threat, sweeping its monstrous, scything talons towards the Space Marines. Battle Brothers fell beneath the beast's devastating strikes, their armour sundered and bodies broken. Lyson felt a wave of fury wash over him. "For the Emperor and Sanguinius!" he cried, and rushed forwards, combat blade raised into the shadow of the monstrous Xenos foe. Lyson rushed under the exposed belly of the screeching Hive Tyrant and thrust his crackling power sword into the ravening beast's gut. The blade bit through the chitinous plate, releasing a stream of acid blood that steamed and hissed as it flowed across his weapon and down onto his gauntlet. Lyson's remaining squad mates poured fire into the winged beast, but despite their combined firepower, the monstrosity refused to fall. It scuttled forward, striking at Lyson with the sharp tips of its limbs, while simultaneously firing the living weapon attached to its winged form. The weapon spat forth a spray of seed-like projectiles that impacted the armour of the Blood Angels and sprouted into lashing, barbed tentacles that ripped into power armour, tearing Space Marines limb from limb. Lyson thrust again and again, avoiding the flailing creature's limbs as he struck the softer armour coating its underside. Despite the steaming streams of blood running from the Tyranid's wounds, Lyson's efforts appeared to have done little to slow its rampage. He made to strike the creature again, only to be struck by a flailing limb which caught him in the flank and pitched him backwards across a series of jagged rocks. He came to rest several metres away, head ringing from the impact. Thankfully, the Tyranid remained distracted by his fellow Space Marines and made no move to follow up on the crushing blow it had dealt him. Lyson dragged himself unsteadily to his feet, his biomechanically enhanced body pumping restorative stimulants through his battered body, driving back pain and beginning to knit torn flesh and broken bones together once more. Captain Carlane's Terminator Guard had overcome the Gene Stealer assault and were advancing swiftly over the bodies of their alien foes, ichor coating their blood-red plate. The Hive Tyrant turned to face the new threat, bringing its strangler cannon to bear on the First Company veterans. Carlane had broken into a lumbering run. Seed-like projectiles thundered past his bulky form, felling several of his brothers, but doing nothing to slow the captain's determined advance. The Hive Tyrant's presence had drawn other Xenos lifeforms to the fight. On the captain's flank, another vast alien monster lumbered into sight, a hunched quadruped bearing a colossal ranged weapon, the surface of which was alive with flesh-eating beetles. "Target the Tyrannofex!" Lyson bellowed over his squad's Vox channel. "Bring it down! Protect the captain!" Drawing back from the Hive Tyrant's murderous rampage, Squad Lyson turned their attentions towards the Tyrannofex. Two swollen biomorphs in the shape of extra limbs protruded from the Tyrannofex's body. Thick clouds of buzzing beetles swarmed from holes in their surface. These tiny, flesh-eating creatures were capable of burrowing through a Space Marine's armour and devouring the soft flesh beneath. His squad of 10 had been reduced to 5 by the wrath of the Hive Tyrant. Lyson knew that they had no hope of stopping the Tyrannofex alone. Their task was to distract the beast, not slay it. Carlane and his Terminators engaged the Hive Tyrant already. The captain's thunderhammer let out an audible crack with each blow he inflicted upon the Tyranid leader. Lyson's intercessors advanced slowly, bolt rifles raised to their shoulders. "Target the eyes!" Sergeant Lyson roared above the din of battle. precise bolt of fire raked the creature's head. The majority of the rounds bounced away, deflected by its chitinous plate, but some found their mark, burying themselves within the beast's flesh and then exploding, sending showers of gore spraying out. The Tyrannofex let out an agonized screech and barreled forwards, bowling the nearest intercessor from his feet and stabbing a pointed limb down into the stricken marine's chest. It raised the leg, shaking the dead soldier loose. More of the biting bugs poured from its colossal bulk in waves, the beating of their wing cases creating a hideous, disorienting cacophony that overwhelmed the senses. Another space marine fell beneath the cloud, clawing and scratching as his ceramite plate letting out pained cries as the flesh borers burrowed into vital organs. Lyson broke into a run, clambering up an outcropping of sharp rocks, his power armor's servo motors propelling him forwards. He bounded from rock to rock, gaining height with each bounding step, before launching himself onto the beast's armoured back. Driving his blade into a seam between two of the ridged plates upon the creature's back, he was rewarded with a screech of agony. Clinging to his weapon, he forced it deeper into the creature's body. Astride the Tyrannofex, Lyson glanced towards the hive tyrant. Captain Carlane's hammer descended upon the monster's skull with terrible force, smashing through the chitinous plates and felling the tyrannid leader. Beneath Lyson, the Tyrannofex bucked and twisted, dislodging him and pitching him into the dirt. The tyrannid loomed over him, its slavering maw dripping acidic saliva onto his plate armour. Lyson knew that the death of the hive tyrant had severed the Tyrannofex from the hive mind. It reeled backwards as bolt rounds slammed into its armoured form. All around, the tyrannid swarm had begun to lose its cohesion. A thin smile cracked across Lyson's bruised and battered face as he watched the swarm fall into disarray. The time for vengeance had come. Baal must stand. The future of the chapter relies upon it. Hold nothing back, brothers. Embrace the Primarch's rage and smite the alien without mercy. Show no restraint, brothers, for this is a foe with no concept of mercy. This is a relentless tide of savagery which we must match with pitiless violence and bloody sacrifice of our own. When the dust clears, the Arx Angelicum shall stand. This I swear to the Primarch and the Emperor. Captain Carlane, Blood Angel's first company. And there you go. That is the second long story that we've enjoyed now. And I tell you what, that reads so much better than Crimson Doom. The fact that it just flows, the same conflict, the same combat flowing from one sort of chapter, I suppose you can call it, into the next, is so much better. It's it reads so much better and clearer. There were little things like going. The first part, it sort of describes Brother Lyson as having a combat blade, but then going into the second chapter, all of a sudden it's a power sword. In the first chapter, we don't really know what enemy the captain of the first company, the Terminators, what he's fighting, and then in the second chapter, all of a sudden it's Gene Stealers. There's little things that, because of the lack of time, they can't kind of fit it all, but you can kind of understand why. You can understand why these things happen. But what a much easier and much better read. I properly enjoyed that. I think it still suffers a little bit from the proper noun soup, because everything's Tyrannid, Tyrannofex, Captain, Terminator, Gene Stealer. Everything's specific terms to the universe. But actually understanding what's going on and where things are happening, it's so much better, so much clearer. I enjoyed that way more than I did Crimson Doom. So let me know what you think down in the comments. That's story number 7. We've got story number 8, Vengeful Hunters, coming up next, and I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you, boys and girls, and goodbye.